a weathered farmer and a scarred veteran duck behind a rusted combine harvester as black SUVs encircle the property, armed men in tactical gear advancing through the wheat fields. Just 24 hours earlier, he offered the mysterious ex-soldier a job despite his neighbor's dire warnings. When dawn broke the following day, government vehicles suddenly swarmed the farm, forcing both men to face a classified past and make decisions that would forever alter their community's future. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. And Thomas Reeves wiped sweat from his brow as he surveyed his 120 acres of drought-stricken wheat fields, the early morning sun already promising another scorching day. At 62, the deep creases in his sun-weathered face chronicled nearly 4 decades, working the same land his grandfather had claimed after returning from Korea. The irrigation system had failed again, the 3rd time this month, and the forecast promised no rain for the foreseeable future. He walked to the edge of his eastern field, boots kicking up dust where rich soil should have been. The wheat stalks stood half as tall as they should this time of year. Their color, a pale imitation of the golden waves that had once made Pinecrest Valley famous. Thomas knelt, scooping up a handful of parched earth that crumbled between his fingers like ash. Unlike the corporate farms that now dominated Pinecrest Valley, Thomas had resisted the aggressive buyout offers from AgriFuture Industries. While other family farms had surrendered to mounting debts and the promises of early retirement, Thomas remained stubborn in his commitment to independence. His farm was one of only 7 family-owned operations left in a 30-mile radius. Loyalty to a patch of dirt won't feed anyone when the wells run dry, Marcus Whitman had told him just yesterday at the county agricultural meeting. Marcus, the regional director for AgriFuture, had been pressuring Thomas to sell for years, explaining how their patented drought-resistant seeds and automated systems could transform his struggling farm into a model of efficiency. "Your equipment is outdated, Thomas," Marcus had said, gesturing toward the charts projected on the meeting room wall. "You're working twice as hard for half the yield. Our latest satellite imaging shows your soil moisture levels dropping below sustainable thresholds. Another season like this one, and you'll have nothing left to sell except the land itself." Perhaps Marcus was right. The past 3 seasons had been brutal, and Thomas was falling behind on payments for the equipment loan he'd taken out to modernize his eastern fields. His savings were nearly depleted, and the small rental house in town that had provided additional income now stood empty after the last tenants moved away. Thomas walked back to the farmhouse, a 2-story structure that had stood since the 1930s. The white paint was peeling in places, the wraparound porch sagging slightly, where he'd meant to replace support beams last spring before the planting season consumed every waking hour. Inside, the kitchen still bore the touches of Catherine, the hand-sewn curtains, the collection of ceramic roosters she'd started on their honeymoon, the marks on the doorframe where they'd measured Angela's height each birthday until she left. For college. His phone rang, breaking the silence of the early morning. It was Angela, his daughter, who worked as a soil scientist for the State Agricultural Extension Office 3 counties over. "Dad, did you get the water test results back yet?" she asked without preamble. "I've been looking at the county data, and several farms in your area are showing concerning chemical levels. The runoff from those AgriFuture operations might be affecting groundwater more than they've admitted." "Haven't heard anything," Thomas replied, his voice betraying his exhaustion. "Been too busy trying to keep this place from turning into a dust bowl." He didn't mention that the testing kit had been sitting unopened on his desk for 2 weeks, another task he hadn't found time for. "The department's getting reports of crop failures that don't match just drought conditions," Angela continued, the concern evident in her voice. "Something else might be happening there. AgriFuture's fields seem to be doing just fine. Thomas muttered, staring out the window at the neighbour's property where the corporate logo stood on signs marking the boundary. Their wheat stood taller, greener, seemingly impervious to the same conditions devastating his crops. "That's exactly what worries me," Angela replied. "I'm looking at soil composition reports that don't make sense unless they're using something not listed in their public disclosures." "Well, whatever magic they've got, they're not sharing it with the rest of us," Thomas sighed. "I'm worried about you out there alone, Dad," Angela said, her tone softening. "Ever since Mom passed, you've been working yourself too hard. Let me come stay for a few weeks, help you get caught up." "You've got your own work, Angie," Thomas answered, though the offer was tempting. "I'm managing fine." They both knew it wasn't entirely true. After hanging up, Thomas poured himself a second cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. From this vantage point, he could see most of his property, fields that had once produced enough to support his family comfortably, now struggling to yield even a marginal return. The barn needed a new roof. The tractor was held together with spare parts and determination. The fence along the western boundary had been down for months. His grandfather had purchased this land with money saved during his military service, determined to build something lasting after seeing so much destruction overseas. The Reeves farm had survived droughts, floods, and economic downturns, always adapting, always persevering. Thomas had promised his late wife Catherine that their daughter would inherit a thriving legacy, not a financial burden. That promise was getting harder to keep with each passing season. Thomas climbed into his pickup, intending to check on the north pasture where he'd been experimenting with more drought-resistant varieties of feed grass. As he turned the key, the engine coughed twice before catching another repair he couldn't afford to make properly. That's when he noticed the dust cloud rising from the long gravel road that led to his property. A single figure was walking toward the farm, moving with a deliberate, measured pace that immediately caught Thomas's attention. Even from a distance, there was something unmistakably military in the stranger's gait, the kind of disciplined movement that spoke of years of service. The man stopped at the faded "Help Wanted" sign Thomas had posted at the entrance to his driveway last week. No locals had shown interest. Young people were leaving Pinecrest Valley for urban opportunities, not looking for physically demanding farm work with uncertain pay. As Thomas approached in his pickup, he studied the stranger more carefully. Mid-30s, perhaps, with close-cropped, dark hair streaked with premature grey at the temples, broad-shouldered and fit, wearing simple, functional clothes, jeans, boots, and a faded olive t-shirt that had seen better days. A military-style rucksack was slung over one shoulder, but it was the man's face that drew Thomas's attention most strongly. Deeply tanned, with a faint scar running from his left temple to his jawline, and eyes that seemed to be constantly scanning the environment, alert, assessing, calculating distances and potential threats. Those were the eyes of someone who had learned the hard cost of missing details. "Morning," Thomas called out as he stepped from his truck. "Something I can help you with?" "Sign says you're looking for farmhand," the man replied, his voice steady and measured. "I'm looking for work. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Farm experience?" Thomas asked, studying the stranger's calloused hands, working hands, not unlike his own. "Grew up on one in Montana," the man replied. "Before enlisting. Know my way around equipment and livestock." He spoke efficiently, no wasted words, the kind of economy of language Thomas had noticed in other veterans. "Name's Thomas Reeves," he said, extending his hand. "This is my place." "Daniel Mercer," the stranger responded, his grip firm and controlled. "Most people call me Mercer." Thomas noted how Mercer's eyes never stopped moving, scanning the horizon. checking the road behind him, glancing at the farmhouse in the distance. There was nothing threatening in his manner, just a heightened awareness that seemed as natural to him as breathing. "Military?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. "Army, 75th Ranger Regiment, 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq." Again, just facts, no emotion attached to the words. "Honorably discharged 4 years ago." Thomas nodded. His late brother had served in Vietnam, came back changed in ways the family never fully understood. "What brings you to Pinecrest Valley?" "We're not exactly on any main highways." Something flickered in Mercer's eyes. Caution, perhaps. "Passing through. Looking for quiet work." A slight pause. Someplace out of the way. Thomas considered the man before him. Something about Mercer's story didn't quite add up. Rangers were elite soldiers, highly trained specialists. Most transitioned to law enforcement, security contracting, or government work after discharge. Why would someone with those qualifications be walking down a dusty road, looking for farmhand work that barely paid minimum wage? Yet there was something in Mercer's direct gaze that Thomas trusted instinctively. Whatever the man's full story might be, he wasn't looking to cause trouble. And Thomas desperately needed the help. "Pays not much," Thomas admitted. "Can offer room and board in the bunkhouse. It's basic but clean." "That works for me, sir." Thomas smiled slightly. "Drop the sir. I worked for a living too." A ghost of a smile crossed Mercer's face, recognizing the old military joke. Officers were sirs. Enlisted men actually worked. "Army?" Mercer asked. "No. But my father was World War II, Pacific Theater. Brother was Vietnam, 101st Airborne." Thomas didn't mention how his brother had returned with nightmares that never fully left him until the day he died. "The job's yours if you want it," Thomas continued. "Can you start today?" "Yes," Mercer replied simply. "I can start now." Thomas drove Mercer to the small bunkhouse near the barn. The structure had originally housed seasonal workers when the farm had been larger and more prosperous. It had stood empty for nearly 2 years now, ever since Thomas had been forced to let go of his last full-time help. The bunkhouse was simple. 2 rooms with basic furniture, a small bathroom, and a kitchenette. Everything was dusty but intact. "I'll get you some clean sheets," Thomas said. "Water heater works fine. Might take a while to warm up." Mercer set his rucksack, his only possession, on the small table. Thomas noticed he placed it carefully, positioning it so that it faced the door. "There's a town meeting tonight at the community center," Thomas mentioned. "Monthly thing, mostly local business, but it'll give you a chance to meet some folks from around here." What Thomas didn't say was that bringing Mercer to the meeting would head off the inevitable gossip when word got out that he'd hired a stranger. Pinecrest Valley was small enough that new faces always drew attention. Mercer seemed to understand the unspoken reasoning. "Sounds good. What time?" 7. "We can head in together, pick up some groceries for you beforehand." As they walked back outside, Thomas pointed out the immediate tasks that needed attention. A section of fence along the southern property line that needed repair. An irrigation pump that had been giving him trouble. Weeds encroaching on the western field that needed clearing. "I'll show you around, get you oriented," Thomas said. "Actually," Mercer replied, scanning the property with a practiced eye, "if you point me to the tools, I can get started on the fence. Daylight's burning." Thomas was surprised but pleased. "Tools are in the barn, east side." He described the location of the fence damage and watched as Mercer nodded, already mentally mapping the task. "I'll check on you in a couple hours. Bring some water," Thomas added. By mid-afternoon, Thomas was impressed. Not only had Mercer repaired the broken section of fence, but he'd reinforced several other weak spots Thomas hadn't even mentioned. When Thomas brought him to look at the troublesome irrigation pump, Mercer disassembled it with practiced efficiency, identified a worn impeller that Thomas had missed, and reassembled the unit using parts from an old backup pump in the barn. "Where'd you learn to work on equipment like this?" Thomas asked as the pump hummed back to life. Mercer tightened the last bolt before answering. "In the field. When your water purification system fails 50 miles from the nearest base, you figure it out or you don't survive." He wiped his hands on a rag. "Farm equipment's simpler, actually. Fewer electronics, more straightforward mechanics." Thomas noticed a long scar on Mercer's forearm, revealed when he rolled up his sleeve to work on the pump. It was the distinctive mark of a shrapnel wound, something Thomas recognized from his brother's injuries. Mercer caught his glance and casually rolled his sleeve back down. "Kandahar, 2014, Mercer said matter-of-factly. "IED took out our lead vehicle. Could have been worse." Thomas nodded, not pressing further. If there was one thing he'd learned from his brother, it was that veterans shared their stories when and if they chose to, not when asked. As evening approached, they drove into town in Thomas's pickup. Thomas noticed how Mercer sat in the passenger, his seat back straight, eyes constantly scanning the road ahead and the terrain around them, right hand resting near the door handle, always ready, always alert. Pinecrest Valley was a small agricultural community that had seen better days. Main Street featured a handful of businesses: the general store, a diner, a small hardware store, a bank, and a post office. Several storefronts stood empty, testament to the changing economic realities of rural America. "Town's been hit hard these past few years," Thomas explained as they parked. "Young folks leave for the cities, don't come back. Corporate farms don't need as many workers as family operations." Those that do stick around often end up working for AgriFuture or other big outfits. "Same story everywhere," Mercer observed, his eyes taking in the buildings and the few people moving along the sidewalks. Thomas noticed how he automatically noted exits, lines of sight, potential cover positions, the habitual situational awareness of someone who had operated in hostile territory. They stopped first at Dawson's general store to pick up supplies for Mercer. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, and Ellie Dawson looked up from behind the counter. In her 60s, with salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun, Ellie had run the store since her husband passed away nearly 15 years. Earlier, "Thomas Reeves, twice in 1 week," she said with a smile that faded slightly when she noticed Mercer behind him. "Who's your friend?" "Ellie, this is Daniel Mercer. Just hired him to help out at the farm. Mercer, this is Ellie Dawson, knows everything and everyone in Pinecrest Valley." "A pleasure, ma'am," Mercer said with a politeness that seemed to ease some of Ellie's initial reserve. "New to town?" she asked, though it was obvious he was. "Yes, ma'am. Just passing through, looking for work." "Well, you found it with a good man," Ellie said, though Thomas caught the curious look in her eyes. New faces in Pinecrest Valley were rare enough to cause speculation, especially those with the hardened appearance of someone like Mercer. As Mercer gathered basic supplies, Thomas noticed Ellie motioning him over to the counter. "Where'd you find him?" she asked in a low voice, glancing toward Mercer, who was examining canned goods on a distant shelf. "Walking up to the farm, saw my help wanted sign," Thomas replied casually. "You know anything about him?" "Army Ranger. Seems to know his way around farm equipment. That's all I need to know." Ellie's expression turned concerned. "Be careful, Thomas. After what happened at the Peterson place a few years back, she didn't need to finish. Everyone in the valley remembered when the Petersons had hired a drifter who'd ended up stealing most of their valuables and disappearing one night. Mercer's not like that," Thomas said, with more confidence than he perhaps felt. "Military background, honest eyes." Ellie didn't look convinced. "Well, I hope your judge of character is better than Ben Peterson's was." After paying for the supplies, they headed to the community center where the monthly town meeting was already gathering. Thomas noticed how conversations quieted as he entered with Mercer, how eyes followed them as they found seats near the back of the room. Thomas made a point of introducing Mercer to several people. Bill Hawkins, who ran the hardware store, Dr. Sanderson, who'd been the town's only physician for 30 years, and a few other farmers from neighboring properties. Some were polite but reserved. Others, like Bill, were openly friendly. "Any friend of Thomas's is welcome in my store," Bill said, shaking Mercer's hand. "First-time customers get a 10% discount." Throughout these introductions, Thomas didn't miss the whispers, the sideways glances. Small towns had long memories, and outsiders were always viewed with initial suspicion. The meeting itself was routine: budget updates for road repairs, discussion about the upcoming harvest festival, concerns about decreasing water table levels throughout the county. Thomas noticed how Mercer observed everything with quiet attention, his back to the wall, where he could see all entrances and exits, his posture relaxed but ready. As the formal meeting ended, and people began to mingle with coffee and cookies, provided by the Ladies' Auxiliary, Marcus Whitman from AgriFuture approached, his expensive suit out of place among the casual attire of most attendees. "Thomas," Marcus said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "surprised to see you here. Thought you'd be working late trying to salvage what you can from those eastern fields." "Even farmers need a night off, Marcus," Thomas replied evenly. Marcus's gaze shifted to Mercer. "And who's this? Don't believe we've met." "Daniel Mercer," Thomas said. "My new farmhand." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Hiring help now? Thought you could barely keep the lights on as it is." Thomas felt his jaw tighten, but kept his voice level. "Farm's doing just fine, Marcus. Just needed an extra pair of hands." Marcus studied Mercer with undisguised curiosity. "And what brings you to our little community, Mr. Mercer?" "We're not exactly a destination spot. Work," Mercer replied simply, his face revealing nothing. Before Marcus could press further, Sheriff Ray Dawson, Ellie's brother-in-law, joined their small group. In his early 50s, Ray had been sheriff of Pinecrest County for nearly 15 years. "Evening, Thomas," the sheriff said genially, before turning to Mercer. "Don't believe we've met. Ray Dawson, county sheriff." "Daniel Mercer," Mercer replied, shaking the sheriff's hand. Thomas noticed how the sheriff held the handshake a moment longer than necessary, his eyes making their own assessment. "Military?" Ray asked. "Army Rangers," Ray nodded. "Thought so. My nephew served Marines, 2 tours. In Iraq. Something unspoken passed between them, a recognition between those who understood service. Stop by the station tomorrow if you get a chance. Always like to get to know new folks in the area." "Will do," Mercer replied with a slight nod. As they prepared to leave, elderly May Wilson, who had taught in the local school for over 40 years before retiring, stopped Thomas at the door. Her lined face was creased with concern. "Be careful, Thomas," she whispered, glancing toward Mercer, who was waiting near the truck. "That young man has seen things, done things. I can tell." "Haven't we all, May?" Thomas replied gently. She shook, her head firmly. "Not like him. There's darkness there." Sheriff Dawson appeared at Thomas's side, having overheard the exchange. "Thomas, got a minute?" They stepped outside into the cool evening air, away from curious ears. "You remember what happened with that drifter the Petersons took in back in 2018? Ray asked quietly. Thomas nodded. "Ellie already reminded me. And that incident at the Carson farm a few years back," Ray continued. "I'm not saying your guy is anything like that, but folks around here have long memories." "Mercer's not like that," Thomas said, the second time he'd made that assertion that evening. Ray's expression softened. "Just be smart, Thomas. Keep your eyes open." He glanced toward Mercer, who was waiting by the truck, his posture relaxed but alert. "Military guys who show up in places like this, sometimes they're running from something. Might be just memories, might be something more complicated." Thomas appreciated the sheriff's concern, but something in him had already decided to trust Mercer, despite knowing almost nothing about the man. "I'll be careful, Ray," he promised. The drive back to the farm was mostly silent. Thomas didn't push for conversation, and Mercer seemed content with the quiet. But as they turned onto the gravel road leading to the farmhouse, Mercer spoke. "They don't want me here," he observed. "Not a question, just a statement of fact. Some don't," Thomas acknowledged. "Others are just cautious. Small town. I can find work somewhere else." Thomas shook his head. "If I worried about what everyone in the valley thought, I'd never get out of bed in the morning." He paused, then added, "Unless you're planning to cause trouble, in which case I should know now." "No, sir," Mercer replied with quiet certainty. "No trouble. Just looking for quiet work for a while." Thomas nodded, satisfied. But as he pulled up to the farmhouse, he couldn't help wondering if he was making a mistake. He knew virtually nothing about this man beyond his military service and apparent mechanical abilities. What had Sheriff Dawson meant about military guys running from something? What Thomas couldn't know was that by this time tomorrow, his decision to hire Daniel Mercer would either prove to be the biggest mistake of his life, or the thing that saved everything he cared about. Dawn broke with the sound of metal striking metal. Thomas woke, momentarily confused by the rhythmic clanging, then remembered Mercer. Glancing at his bedside clock, 5:30 a.m., Thomas dressed quickly and headed outside. He found Mercer in the equipment shed, already deep into repairing the old tractor that had been giving Thomas trouble for months. Parts were laid out in precise order on a tarp, the engine partially disassembled. "Been up long?" Thomas asked. Mercer looked up briefly from his work. "Couple hours. Hope you don't mind. Saw this needed attention." Thomas was impressed, but not surprised after yesterday's display of mechanical aptitude. "Mind? Hell, that tractor's been more ornament than equipment lately. Coffee's on in the house when you're ready for a break." Over a simple breakfast of eggs and toast, Thomas laid out the day's priorities, checking irrigation lines in the north field, clearing a drainage ditch that had become clogged with debris, and if time permitted, beginning preparations for replanting a section of the eastern field where the wheat had failed completely. "Your daughter called while you were in the shower," Mercer mentioned, his tone casual, but eyes watchful for Thomas's reaction. "Said she's coming by tomorrow instead of next week. Something about water test results she wants to discuss in person." Thomas frowned. Angela wasn't prone to changing plans without good reason. Did she sound worried? Professional concern, I'd say. Not personal alarm. It was a precise distinction that Thomas appreciated, the kind of situational assessment a soldier would make. By mid-morning, the tractor was running more smoothly than it had in years. Mercer had somehow coaxed the aging machine back to life, using nothing but the mismatched tools in Thomas's shed and what looked like sheer determination. They worked side by side on the irrigation lines, Mercer asking few questions but absorbing Thomas's explanations about the farm's water system with focused attention. "Systems inefficient," Mercer observed as they examined a leaking connection, "losing at least 30% to evaporation and these junction leaks." Thomas sighed. "Been meaning to upgrade to drip irrigation, but..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Money, or the lack of it, was the obvious constraint. "Military uses similar systems in forward operating bases," Mercer said, examining the connection more closely. "Could probably repurpose some of this existing hardware, reduce your water loss by half without major investment." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You know how to do that?" A ghost of a smile crossed Mercer's face. "When you're responsible for water supply in places where temperatures hit 120 degrees, you get creative or you get dead." As they worked, Thomas found himself sharing more about the farm's history, his grandfather's determination to build something lasting after the Korean War, his own decision to maintain traditional farming methods despite mounting pressure to sell to AgriFuture. Mercer listened more than he spoke, but when he did offer comments, they were thoughtful and perceptive. Your neighbour's crops, Mercer said during a water break, nodding toward the adjacent AgriFuture property. Different colour than yours, more blue-green. Thomas hadn't noticed before, but Mercer was right. They're proprietary seed varieties, supposed to be more drought-resistant. And the soil line at the property boundary, Mercer continued, sharp colour differential, that's not natural. Again, Thomas looked where Mercer was pointing and saw what he had missed, the almost artificial demarcation between his own struggling fields and the corporate farmland next door. The contrast was too stark to be explained by different seed varieties alone. My daughter's concerned about their agricultural practices, Thomas admitted. Says they might be using chemicals there, not disclosing. Mercer nodded but said nothing more, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the boundary line. Around noon, Thomas's phone rang. It was Marcus Whitman from AgriFuture. Thomas, Marcus said without preamble, I'm sending over some paperwork for you to look at. New offer on your property. Given your current situation, I think you'll find it more than fair. Not interested, Marcus, Thomas replied firmly. At least look at the numbers. Times are changing. That drought's not breaking anytime soon, and our meteorological data suggests next season will be worse. Your meteorological data, Thomas repeated, skeptically. We're offering 20% above market value, Thomas. That's today, 6 months from now when you're facing foreclosure. That offer won't be on the table. Thomas felt his jaw tighten. Is that a threat? Just business reality, Marcus replied smoothly. By the way, heard you hired help. Ex-military, I understand. Interesting choice, given your financial situation. The implied question hung in the air, but Thomas didn't take the bait. Thanks for the offer, Marcus. Not interested. He ended the call, trying to hide his frustration. They want your land badly, Mercer observed. Not a question. Been after it for years, Thomas confirmed. Started with friendly offers. Gotten less friendly over time. Mercer's expression was thoughtful. But they haven't approached any of the other holdout farmers with the same persistence. How'd you know that? Just an observation. Your property has strategic value to them beyond the acreage. Mercer gazed across the landscape, his eyes stopping at a small rise on the eastern boundary. Your land controls the watershed for this entire section of the valley, doesn't it? Thomas stared at him, surprised. It had taken him years of farming to understand the unique hydrology of his property, how the natural contours of the land channeled groundwater in particular ways, and how the aquifer beneath his eastern fields fed springs throughout the valley. How did you figure that out in less than a day? Mercer's eyes continued scanning the terrain. Terrain analysis, basic skill for reconnaissance operations, high ground, water sources, natural choke points, first things you look for. His gaze settled on the small creek that ran along the property's eastern edge. Mind if I take a water sample there? Planning on doing some chemical analysis in your spare time? Thomas asked, only half joking. Wouldn't be the first time, Mercer replied without elaboration. Later that afternoon, as they finished clearing the drainage ditch, Thomas noticed a vehicle he didn't recognize, driving slowly past the farm. A black SUV with government plates. It continued down the road without stopping, but Thomas saw how Mercer's entire demeanor changed in an instant. His body tensing, eyes tracking the vehicle with laser focus, hand instinctively shifting to his hip where a weapon might once have been carried. Friend of yours? Thomas asked lightly, trying to ease the sudden tension. No, Mercer replied, his voice flat. The transformation was striking, from capable farmhand to alert soldier in the space of a heartbeat. Thomas waited, but Mercer offered no further explanation, his eyes still fixed on the road where the vehicle had disappeared. After a long moment, he seemed to consciously relax his posture, though his eyes remained watchful. Government vehicle, Thomas observed. Probably USDA or County Extension Office. They're around more often since the drought started. Mercer nodded, but didn't seem convinced. Probably, he echoed. but the wariness remained in his eyes. They returned to work, but Thomas noticed that Mercer positioned himself to keep sightlines to the road open, his attention divided between the task at hand and the approach to the farm. Whatever or whoever had been in that SUV had triggered something in the veteran. When they broke for a late lunch, Thomas decided to address the obvious question. "You running from something, Mercer?" The directness of the question seemed to take Mercer by surprise. For a moment, Thomas thought he wouldn't answer. "Not running," Mercer finally said. "Just needed distance. Time to think." "From what?" Mercer carefully set down his sandwich. "Last assignment was complicated. Private security contractor. Started conventional. Protection details. Threat assessment. Ended up being asked to do things that crossed lines." "What kind of lines?" "Legal ones. Moral ones." Mercer's jaw tightened. "I said no. Left the contract. Some people weren't happy with that decision." Thomas nodded slowly, reading between the lines. "These unhappy people, they likely to come looking for you?" "Unlikely," Mercer replied, but Thomas caught the slight hesitation. "Not worth their effort for one ex-employee with an attack of conscience." Thomas wasn't entirely convinced, but he appreciated the honesty. "Well, your conscience is welcome here. Farm needs the help." A hint of a smile touched Mercer's lips. "Appreciate that." As evening approached, they drove into town to pick up parts for the irrigation system modifications. Mercer had proposed. The hardware store was about to close when they arrived, but Bill Hawkins, the owner, waved them in. "Thomas and Mr. Mercer, right? Come on in. What can I help you with?" As Mercer explained precisely what they needed, Bill's eyebrows rose. "That's an ingenious solution. Military background showing there. You boys always could make something from nothing." While Bill gathered the parts, Thomas noticed Sheriff Dawson enter the store. The sheriff nodded to Thomas before approaching Mercer. "Mr. Mercer, thought you might stop by the station today." "Sorry, Sheriff, got caught up in repairs." "I'll come by tomorrow morning." Ray nodded, seemingly satisfied. "How you finding Pinecrest Valley so far?" "Quiet. Good people." Mercer's answers were polite but minimal. "Where'd you serve?" Ray asked casually, though Thomas sensed the question. "Was anything but casual. Afghanistan, Iraq. Based out of Fort Benning with the 75th. Ranger, huh? Impressive." Ray studied Mercer with professional interest. "What brought you to our little corner of nowhere? Most Rangers I've known end up in law enforcement or security work after discharge." "Did that route. Didn't fit." Mercer's tone made it clear he wasn't interested in elaborating. The sheriff seemed to accept this, though Thomas noticed how his eyes lingered on Mercer, assessing. "Well, stop by tomorrow. Like to get your details for our records. Small town likes to know who's around." After the sheriff left, Bill leaned across the counter. "Don't mind Ray, he's thorough but fair. This town's had some bad experiences with drifters in the past." "So I've heard," Mercer replied. As they paid for the parts and headed toward the truck, Thomas noticed the same black SUV from earlier parked across the street. This time, there was a man in a suit standing beside it, watching them with unabashed interest. When he saw them looking, he spoke into what appeared to be a communication device on his wrist. Mercer noticed it too, his entire body language shifting again to alert readiness. "We should go," he said quietly. "Friend of yours after all?" Thomas asked as they climbed into the truck. Not friend, not exactly enemy either. Mercer's eyes remained fixed on the rearview mirror as they pulled away. "Complicated. Lot of complications in your life, seems like." Mercer's expression was grim. "More than I wanted to bring to your door." Thomas drove in silence for a moment, processing this. "These complications, they dangerous?" "Could be," Mercer admitted. "To me, not to you. I should move on, find somewhere else." Thomas considered this as they turned onto the gravel road leading to the farm. Part of him knew that was the sensible option. Whatever Mercer was involved with, it clearly had the potential to cause problems. But in just one day, the veteran had done more to help the farm than Thomas could have managed in weeks. And there was something about Mercer's situation that resonated with Thomas, a man trying to do the right thing despite pressure to compromise. "Way I see it," Thomas said as they approached the farmhouse, "a man should be judged by what he does, not who might be looking for him." He parked the truck and turned to face Mercer. "You've done honest work today. Fixed things I couldn't. That counts for something in my book." "Might not be that simple," Mercer warned. "Things rarely are," Thomas agreed. "But my father used to say the right choice is usually the hardest one. Seems to me you made a hard choice walking away from whatever lines they wanted you to cross." For the first time, Thomas saw genuine surprise in Mercer's eyes, as if the veteran wasn't accustomed to people taking his side. "I appreciate that," Mercer said finally, "but I don't want to bring trouble to your door. Door's already got plenty." "Of trouble," Thomas replied with a wry smile. "Drought, bank loans, corporate vultures, what's one more complication?" As they unloaded the parts from the truck, Thomas's phone rang. It was Angela again. "Dad, don't use the water," she said immediately, her voice tight with urgency. "Any of it. Not for drinking, not for irrigation, nothing." "What? Why?" "The test results just came back. There are chemical compounds in your groundwater that shouldn't be there. Military-grade herbicides, compounds that aren't approved for agricultural use. I've never seen contamination patterns like this." Thomas felt a chill run through him. "AgriFuture? I can't prove it yet, but the concentration increases dramatically at your property boundary with their fields. This isn't accidental overspray, Dad. This looks deliberate." Thomas's mind raced. If what Angela was suggesting was true, that AgriFuture was deliberately contaminating his water supply, it would explain the persistent crop failures, the strange differential at the property line, Marcus's increasing pressure to sell. "I'm coming tomorrow with proper testing equipment," Angela continued, "and I'm bringing someone from the Environmental Protection Division. This is serious, Dad." After hanging up, Thomas relayed the conversation to Mercer, who listened with a focused intensity that made Thomas suspect the news confirmed something the veteran had already suspected. "Those water samples you took today," Thomas said. "You weren't just being thorough, were you?" Mercer's expression was grim. "Saw it in Afghanistan. Corporate contractors would contaminate local farms, then buy the land cheap when crops failed. Called it aggressive acquisition. You think AgriFuture is deliberately poisoning my land to force me to sell?" The idea seemed almost too villainous to be believable, yet it would explain much of what had been happening. "Your farm controls. The watershed," Mercer pointed out. "That makes it valuable beyond just acreage, and that black SUV today wasn't government, at least not the kind that regulates agriculture." "What do you mean?" "Private security contractors. I recognized the type, high-end, probably ex-special forces." Mercer's voice was flat. "The kind of security you hire when you're doing things you don't want people to notice." Thomas felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. What had seemed like simple bad luck and economic pressure now appeared to be something far more sinister. "My daughter's bringing an environmental inspector tomorrow," he said. "If there's evidence of deliberate contamination, AgriFuture could face serious consequences." Mercer nodded slowly, but his expression remained troubled. "If these people are who I think they are, they won't let that happen easily." "What do you mean?" "Just be careful," Mercer warned. "Corporate operations like this, they don't play by normal rules when they're cornered." As darkness fell over the farm, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. The quiet struggle to save his family legacy had suddenly become something more dangerous, more complex. And the mysterious veteran he'd hired seemed to understand these new complexities all too well. What Thomas couldn't possibly know was that the true nature of the threat would reveal itself with shocking clarity when morning came. Thomas woke before dawn, his mind still churning with Angela's alarming news about the water contamination. He found Mercer already outside, methodically walking the property perimeter, studying the ground with focused attention. In the dim pre-dawn light, Mercer moved with the careful precision of someone conducting a security sweep. "Expecting trouble?" Thomas asked, approaching with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. Mercer accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. Always better to be prepared than surprised. He gestured toward the eastern boundary. "Found something you should..." You see, they walked together toward the property line adjacent to AgriFuture's land. As the sun began to rise, Mercer pointed to a small, unnatural depression near the fence. "Delivery system," he explained, kneeling beside what looked like a sophisticated irrigation component, partially hidden in the soil. "Timed release mechanism, military grade." Thomas crouched for a closer look. "What is it?" "Chemical dispersal unit, designed to release contents gradually into the water table. Saw similar systems in conflict zones, usually for delivering water treatment chemicals to remote bases." Mercer's expression hardened. "This isn't being used for water treatment." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. "You're saying AgriFuture planted this deliberately on my property to contaminate my groundwater?" "Not just one," Mercer said grimly. "Found 3 so far, all along your eastern boundary where the creek feeds. Your irrigation system." Thomas struggled to comprehend the deliberate malice such actions represented. "That's criminal, corporate sabotage." "It's more than that," Mercer replied, his voice dropping lower. "These aren't agricultural equipment. This technology is classified, developed for military applications, not available commercially." Thomas looked up sharply. "Then how did AgriFuture get them?" Mercer's expression became guarded. "That's what concerns me. These units are manufactured by Centaur Operations Group, private military contractor with government connections." He hesitated. "My former employer." The pieces suddenly clicked into place for Thomas. Mercer's reaction to the black SUV, his comments about crossing lines, his immediate recognition of the contamination pattern. "You didn't just happen to be walking by my farm, did you?" Thomas asked quietly. Mercer met his gaze directly. "No. I came here looking for evidence, followed a trail from other affected agricultural regions. Small farms, failing under mysterious circumstances, always adjacent to corporate acquisitions, always with the same contamination signature." "You're investigating AgriFuture?" "Not exactly." Mercer stood, scanning the horizon with practiced vigilance. "Investigating Centaur. AgriFuture is just one of their clients." Thomas processed this revelation. "So you're what? Some kind of whistleblower?" "Tried that route," Mercer said, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. "Went to Army CID with evidence of Centaur's illegal operations 6 months ago. 2 days later, my apartment was ransacked, my records stolen. Week after that, nearly died when my car brakes failed mysteriously." A chill ran through Thomas as the full implications became clear. These people tried to kill you. Centaur doesn't tolerate loose ends. Mercer's voice was matter-of-fact. "I've been tracking their operations since then, gathering evidence, staying off the grid. Your farm is the 4th location I've found with their dispersal technology. Why not go to the FBI or the media?" "Centaur has connections throughout the government, former generals on their board, contracts with every intelligence agency. As for media..." Mercer's expression darkened. "The journalist I contacted was found dead 3 days later. Home invasion gone wrong, according to the official report." Thomas felt as if he'd stepped into a conspiracy thriller rather than the straightforward battle against corporate agriculture he'd thought he was fighting. What does Centaur gain from helping agricultural corporations force out small farmers? It's not about agriculture, Mercer explained. It's about the land itself. Every contaminated property I've tracked sits above significant water resources or mineral deposits. Your farm controls the watershed for this entire valley. In a drought-stricken region, that's strategic value. So AgriFuture is what? A front? Perhaps unknowingly. They likely contracted Centaur for specialized agricultural security services, without understanding the full scope of what they were getting. Mercer's eyes continued scanning their surroundings as he spoke. But someone at AgriFuture knows what's happening here. The sound of an approaching vehicle interrupted their conversation. Thomas recognized his daughter's car coming up the driveway, followed by another vehicle he didn't recognize, likely the environmental inspector she'd mentioned. "That's Angela," Thomas said. "With her evidence and these dispersal units you found, we can prove deliberate contamination. Stop AgriFuture and expose whatever Centaur is doing." Mercer didn't look convinced. "It won't be that simple. These people don't lose gracefully." His posture had subtly shifted again to combat readiness. "And we're not alone." Thomas followed. Mercer's gaze toward the main road, where a black SUV had parked, partially hidden behind a stand of trees. Even from this distance, Thomas could see two men with binoculars watching the farm. The same vehicle from yesterday, different one. Same organization. Mercer's voice was tight. "They've been watching, waiting to see if I found their dispersal units. Now there's an environmental inspector arriving with your daughter. That changes their timeline." Thomas felt a surge of protectiveness. Angela could be in danger. We all are. Mercer was already moving toward the approaching vehicles. "Get your daughter and the inspector into the house. Keep them away from windows. I'll secure the perimeter." The calm authority in Mercer's voice left no room for argument. Thomas hurried toward the driveway as Angela parked, a middle-aged woman in the passenger seat beside her. "Dad!" Angela called as she stepped from the car, her smile fading as she registered his expression. "What's wrong inside? Both of you, now." Thomas kept his voice level but urgent. "We've found evidence of deliberate contamination, but the situation is more complicated than we thought." Angela's companion, Dr. Lowell, according to her ID badge, looked alarmed. "What do you mean, deliberate? I was told this was a case of agricultural runoff." "It's much more than that," Thomas said, ushering them toward the house. "We need to call the authorities." As they reached the porch, Thomas saw Mercer crouched beside the barn, phone to his ear, speaking rapidly, in what sounded like coded language. His other hand held what Thomas was surprised to recognize as a handgun, something Mercer must have kept concealed among his few possessions. Inside, Thomas quickly explained what Mercer had discovered: the military-grade dispersal units, the connection to Centaur operations group, and the surveillance vehicles watching the property. Angela's face paled. "Dad, this is serious criminal activity. We need to call the FBI, not just local authorities." "Mercer tried that route already," Thomas replied. "Says these people have connections throughout the government. We need to be careful who we trust." Dr. Lowell looked skeptical. "This sounds like conspiracy theory territory. I came here to collect water and soil samples, not get involved in some kind of..." The sound of vehicles approaching at high speed cut her off. Thomas moved to the window, staying to the side as Mercer had instructed. 3 black SUVs were coming up the drive, moving with coordinated precision that confirmed they weren't ordinary visitors. The front door opened, and Mercer entered quickly, his movements economical and focused. "We have company. Centaur tactical team. At least 8 operatives, possibly more." "How do you know they're Centaur?" Angela asked, the scientific skepticism in her voice evident. "Because I trained with them." Mercer was checking sight lines from each window as he spoke. "Recognize the formation, the approach pattern. Standard Centaur protocol for rural containment." "Containment?" Dr. Lowell repeated, alarm growing in her voice. "What does that mean?" "It means they're here to clean up evidence and eliminate witnesses," Mercer said bluntly, his eyes meeting Thomas's. They can't afford to let proof of their operations become public. Thomas felt cold dread settle in his stomach. You're saying they're here to kill us? Not their first option. They'll try to control the situation, confiscate evidence, likely create some pretext to discredit whatever we report. Mercer's voice was clinical, detached. But if that fails, yes, they're prepared for terminal solutions. Angela had grown pale. We need to call Sheriff Dawson. Already did, Mercer replied. Along with a contact at Army Criminal Investigation Division who's been helping me track Centaur's operations. But they're at least 20 minutes out. We need to buy time. Through the window, Thomas could see men in tactical gear deploying around the farmhouse, moving with the practiced efficiency of military operators. One man in a business suit remained by the lead vehicle, older, with silver hair and the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Victor Reeves, Mercer identified him. Centaur's head of operations, ex-Delta Force commander. His presence means they're taking this situation very seriously. Taking what seriously? Angela demanded. Why would a private military contractor care about a small farm in Pinecrest Valley? Mercer moved to Thomas's desk, quickly sketching a rough map of the valley. Your father's property sits at the convergence of 3 underground aquifers. In drought conditions, whoever controls this land controls water access for the entire region. He pointed to markings on the map. These geological formations also suggest mineral deposits, rare earth elements used in high-tech manufacturing. Doctor. Lowell leaned forward, professional interest overcoming her fear momentarily. The soil composition tests I ran did show unusual mineral concentrations. I assumed they were related to the contamination. They're related, but not how you think, Mercer explained. Centaur's been running a sophisticated operation. Identify valuable properties, partnership with corporations like AgriFuture as front organizations, contaminate adjacent lands to force sales, then extract resources without public scrutiny. Thomas watched as more men positioned themselves around the farm, cutting off potential escape routes. So, what's our play here? Mercer's expression was grimly determined. We need the evidence. Both the dispersal units and Dr. Lowell's test results. That's our leverage, and we need to hold out until legitimate authorities arrive. A voice called from outside, amplified by a handheld speaker. Mr. Reeves, this is Victor Reese with Federal Agricultural Security. We need to speak with you regarding a matter of national agricultural safety. Please come out with any guests currently on your property. Thomas exchanged looks with Mercer. Federal Agricultural Security? Doesn't exist, Mercer confirmed. Cover story to explain their presence if anyone drives by. What do we do? Angela whispered. Stall them, Mercer decided. Thomas, you go out front. Keep Reese talking. I'll secure the back of the property. Prepare an exit route if needed. What about us? Dr. Lowell asked, her professional composure beginning to crack. Stay inside, away from windows. Secure your test data. Send it to multiple contacts if you can. They'll try to confiscate your equipment and samples. As Mercer headed toward the rear of the house, Thomas grabbed his arm. You sure about this? These were your colleagues once. Mercer's expression hardened. That's why I know exactly what they're capable of. He checked his weapon with practiced efficiency. And why I can't let them succeed here. Thomas nodded, understanding the weight of what they were facing. As he moved toward the front door, he heard Mercer's final warning. Remember, they want to control the situation without creating evidence of foul play. Use that. Public witnesses are our best protection right now. Taking a deep breath, Thomas stepped onto his porch to confront the man who had orchestrated the slow destruction of his farm, and who now presented a threat to everyone inside his home. What he couldn't know was that the confrontation about to unfold would escalate in ways none of them had anticipated, forcing both Thomas and Mercer to make life-altering decisions in the next few crucial minutes. Thomas stood on his porch, facing the man responsible for the systematic destruction of his livelihood. Victor Reese appeared every inch the corporate executive in his tailored suit, but his posture and calculating gaze betrayed his military background. 6 men in tactical gear had positioned themselves strategically around the farmhouse, while others remained by the vehicles. "Mr. Reeves," Reese called, his voice carrying authority, "I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but we have reason to believe your property has been contaminated with experimental agricultural compounds that pose a significant public health risk." Thomas recognized the strategy Mercer had predicted, establishing a pretext that would justify their presence and any actions they might take. "Funny timing," Thomas replied, keeping his voice steady. "My daughter from the agricultural Extension Office just arrived with an environmental inspector to investigate contamination. Perhaps you should coordinate with them." A flicker of annoyance crossed Reese's face. "We operate under federal jurisdiction, Mr. Reeves. Local agricultural offices aren't equipped to handle this level of threat. I must insist that all parties on your property surrender any collected samples and allow our team to secure the area. Don't recall the federal government having a Federal Agricultural Security Division," Thomas countered, deliberately projecting his voice to ensure it carried across the yard. "And I find it strange that you're so concerned about contamination when my neighbor AgriFuture seems completely unaffected." Reese's expression hardened, but he maintained his professional demeanor. "Mr. Reeves, I understand your confusion, but I assure you we have the authority and obligation to act. Now, I believe you have guests, including a person of interest to federal authorities. Daniel Mercer is wanted for questioning regarding theft of classified materials." Thomas felt a chill despite the morning warmth. Mercer had warned him they would try to create a pretext. "I'd need to see some official identification and warrants before allowing anyone onto my property." From the corner of his eye, Thomas noticed movement, Mercer slipping around the side of the barn, staying low and using outbuildings for cover as he circled behind several of Reese's men. Whatever plan he was executing, Thomas needed to keep. Reese's attention focused forward. "Mr. Reeves," Reese said, his patience visibly thinning, "I don't think you understand the gravity of the situation. This isn't just about your farm. We have evidence that Mercer has been engaged in corporate espionage and sabotage, possibly contaminating properties himself to frame legitimate businesses." The accusation was so audacious that Thomas almost laughed. Reese was attempting to flip the entire narrative, painting Mercer as the perpetrator rather than the whistleblower. "That's an interesting theory," Thomas replied. "Almost as interesting as the military-grade chemical dispersal units we found buried along my property line with AgriFuture. Hard to imagine how those got there, unless someone wanted to deliberately contaminate my groundwater." Reese's expression froze momentarily, then reset to professional concern. "That's exactly why we're here, Mr. Reeves. If such devices have been planted, they represent a significant danger. My team is specifically trained to safely remove and neutralize them." He took a step forward. "Please, allow us to help before anyone is harmed." Thomas stood his ground. "I think we'll wait for Sheriff Dawson. Already called him. Should be here any minute. He can coordinate with whatever federal agencies actually have jurisdiction." For the first time, Reese's composed facade cracked slightly. He glanced at his watch, then motioned to 2 of his men, who immediately moved toward their vehicles, speaking into communication devices. "We don't have time for this, Mr. Reeves," Reese said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Either cooperate voluntarily, or we'll be forced to execute an emergency containment protocol." Inside the house, Thomas knew Angela and Dr. Lowell were hopefully following Mercer's instructions, securing evidence, staying away from windows, contacting outside authorities. He needed to buy more time. "What's AgriFuture's involvement in all this, Mr. Rees?" Thomas asked, deliberately changing tack. "Are they aware you're planting military hardware on neighboring properties? Or are they just the convenient front for whatever Centaur operations really wants with this land?" The name drop had its intended effect. Rees's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Where did you hear that name?" "You're not the only one with sources," Thomas replied, hoping his bluff wasn't too transparent. "Seems like poisoning small farmers to force land sales isn't just unethical, it's criminal conspiracy, environmental terrorism, and probably violates about a dozen federal statutes." Rees abandoned all pretense of the concerned official. "Secure the property," he ordered sharply. "Full containment protocol." His men immediately shifted formation, weapons now clearly visible as they advanced toward the house. Thomas felt a surge of fear, but held his position on the porch. "This is private property," he called out. "You have no legal right to be here." "Final warning, Mr. Reeves," Rees stated coldly. "Step aside, or my men will remove you." The sound of a vehicle approaching at high speed drew everyone's attention. For a moment, Thomas hoped it was Sheriff Dawson arriving early, but instead, it was Marcus Whitman's luxury SUV, skidding to a stop beside the Centaur vehicles. Marcus leaped out, his face flushed with anger as he stormed toward Rees. "What the hell is happening here? This isn't the plan we discussed." Rees's expression darkened. "Get back in your vehicle, Mr. Whitman. This situation has escalated beyond your involvement." "The hell it has!" Marcus shouted, gesturing wildly. "We had an agreement. Gradual pressure, legal acquisition. Not whatever paramilitary operation this is. There are witnesses, for God's sake." Thomas watched the exchange with growing realization. Marcus had been working with these people, but even he seemed shocked by the tactical team and open display of weapons. The situation changed when your gradual pressure failed to produce results, Rees replied coldly. "Now get back in your vehicle and leave, or you'll be included in the containment protocol." The threat hung in the air for a moment before Marcus paled, suddenly understanding his position. "You can't do this. I'm a respected businessman in this community. People know I'm here." "Which is precisely the problem," Rees replied. Two of his men moved toward Marcus, who backpedaled toward his vehicle. The distraction gave Thomas the opening he needed. He slipped back inside the house, locking the door behind him. "They're coming in," he told Angela and Dr. Lowell, who were huddled in the kitchen. "We need to move now." "Where's Mercer?" Angela asked, clutching her tablet with the test data. "Creating a diversion, I think," Thomas replied. "But we can't wait. Out the back, toward the equipment shed." They slipped out the rear door, just as the sound of breaking glass came from the front of the house. Thomas led them in a crouched run, using the row of old apple trees for cover as they made their way toward the large equipment shed where the combine harvester was stored. They had almost reached it when a shout went up from behind them. "3 targets, moving toward the west outbuilding!" "Run!" Thomas urged, pushing Angela and Dr. Lowell ahead of him as bullets struck the ground nearby, warning shots not intended to hit them, but terrifying nonetheless. They ducked into the equipment shed, the massive combine harvester providing immediate cover. Thomas quickly moved them toward the back corner, where rusted farm equipment created a defensible position with limited lines of sight from the entrance. "What do we do now?" Dr. Lowell whispered, her professional composure completely gone. "Before," Thomas could answer. A side door opened and Mercer slipped in, moving silently despite his haste. He carried a small duffel bag that Thomas hadn't seen before. "They've breached the house," Mercer reported, his voice calm despite the dire situation. 8-man team, tactically deployed. They'll secure the property perimeter before conducting a thorough search. "Where did you go?" Thomas asked. "Retrieving insurance," Mercer replied, opening the duffel to reveal 3 of the chemical dispersal units he'd dug up from the property line. "Evidence. Along with this," he held up a small digital recorder. "Captured Marcus Whitman, explicitly referencing AgriFuture's partnership with Centaur and their contamination strategy. Not knowing when to shut up is an executive's greatest weakness. Angela stared at the dispersal units. Will those be enough to prove what they've done? Combined with your water tests and soil samples, yes, Mercer confirmed. But first, we need to survive long enough to get this evidence to the right people. The sound of boots on gravel grew closer. Through gaps in the equipment, sheds weathered. Boards. Thomas could see men systematically searching the outbuildings, moving with coordinated precision. "Sheriff?" Thomas whispered. Mercer checked his phone. 10 minutes out at least, we need to hold this position. He handed Thomas a heavy wrench from a nearby workbench. Last resort only. These men are professionals. They'll neutralize threats without hesitation. Thomas gripped the makeshift weapon, feeling simultaneously foolish and terrified. He was a farmer, not a soldier. Yet here he was, hiding behind farm equipment with his daughter and 2 strangers as armed men hunted them. "The combine," Mercer said suddenly, nodding toward the massive harvester. "Does it run?" "Barely," Thomas replied. "Enough to move it, but not much more." A slow smile spread across Mercer's face, the first genuine smile Thomas had seen from him. "Perfect. I need a diversion. When I give the signal, start it up and drive it straight through the main doors." "You want me to crash my combine through the shed?" Centaur's men are surrounding this building. A 7-ton harvester bursting through the doors will scatter them, create confusion. I need 30 seconds of chaos. Before Thomas could ask what Mercer planned to do with those 30 seconds, voices called from outside. "We know you're in there," came Reeves' authoritative voice. "Come out now, hands visible, and no one needs to get hurt. This is your only warning." Mercer motioned for Thomas to get ready by the combine, while he positioned himself near a side window, the duffel with evidence secured across his body. "Now we find out if your sheriff arrives in time," Mercer whispered, "or if Plan B becomes necessary." "What's Plan B?" Angela asked. The look Mercer gave her was grim. "You don't want to know." Outside, Reeves was counting down. "You have 5 seconds. To comply. 5, 4... Thomas climbed into the combine's cab, praying the ancient machine would start. The key was still in the ignition. He rarely removed it given the remote location of the farm. 3, 2... "Now!" Mercer shouted. Thomas turned the key, and the combine's engine roared to life with a belch of black smoke. He engaged the drive and pushed the throttle forward, aiming directly at the wooden doors. The massive machine lurched forward, gathering speed with ponderous momentum. 1! The combine crashed through the doors in an explosion of splintered wood, just as Reeves' men were preparing to breach. Thomas caught glimpses of men diving for cover, shouting in surprise as the enormous farm implement burst into the open, its heavy metal header swinging destructively. In the chaos, Mercer moved. With practiced efficiency, he fired 2 precise shots from his handgun. Not at the men, Thomas realized, but at the tires of the lead SUV. Then he was sprinting toward the tree line, drawing attention and fire away from the equipment shed where Angela and Dr. Lowell remained. Hidden. Thomas continued driving the combine forward, using its bulk to block the path between Reeves' men and Mercer's escape route. He saw Reeves himself shouting orders, his composed demeanor completely shattered by the unexpected resistance. The distraction worked. Most of the tactical team focused on the immediate threat of the combine and the fleeing Mercer. None noticed the approaching vehicles until sirens suddenly cut through the chaos. 3 Sheriff's Department cruisers screamed up the driveway, lights flashing. Behind them came an unmarked black sedan that skidded to a stop behind Reeves' disabled SUV. "Sheriff." Dawson emerged from the lead cruiser, shotgun in hand. "County Sheriff, everyone freeze and drop your weapons." From the unmarked sedan, 4 men in tactical gear, but with clear FBI identifications visible on their vests, deployed with weapons drawn. "Federal agents," the lead agent shouted. Everyone on the ground now. The farm had become a standoff between Centaur's private military team and legitimate law enforcement. Thomas brought the combine to a halt, watching as Reeves' composed facade completely crumbled. His men looked to him for direction, caught in an impossible tactical situation. For a moment it seemed Reeves might order his team to engage. But as more vehicles arrived, including state police and what appeared to be military police in an armored transport, the calculus visibly shifted in his mind. "Stand down," Reeves ordered his men reluctantly. "Secure positions only." Sheriff Dawson approached cautiously, his shotgun never wavering. "Someone want to explain why a private military unit is conducting operations on my county's soil?" FBI agent who had emerged from the sedan stepped forward. "Agent Carter, FBI Special Investigations. We've been tracking this group for months." He fixed Reeves with a cold stare. "Victor Reeves, you and your men are being detained on suspicion of multiple federal violations, including illegal use of military equipment, environmental terrorism, and conspiracy." Mercer emerged from the tree line, hands carefully visible, approaching Agent Carter directly. "The evidence is secure," he said, handing over the duffel bag. 3 dispersal units, plus recorded confession from AgriFuture's regional director. Carter nodded. "Good work, Lieutenant. Your handler said you'd deliver." Thomas watched in astonishment as the FBI agents professionally detained Reeves and his men, while military police secured the Centaur vehicles. What had seemed like an impossible situation minutes ago had transformed into a coordinated law enforcement operation. Mercer walked over to the combine, where Thomas still sat in the cab, trying to process what had just happened. "You knew they were coming," Thomas said, realization dawning. "You weren't just calling for help, you were activating a planned operation." Mercer's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Let's just say I wasn't working completely alone. After my first attempt to expose Centaur failed, I found allies within military intelligence who were already investigating them. Been feeding information to a joint FBI military task force for months." "So you used my farm as bait?" Thomas wasn't sure whether to be angry or impressed. "More like the final piece of evidence we needed," Mercer clarified. "I'd tracked Centaur's operations across 3 states, but could never catch them in the act. With their equipment deployed, your farm presented the perfect opportunity, isolated enough for them to operate, but with clear evidence of their methods. And if your backup hadn't arrived in time—" Mercer's expression grew serious. "Then Plan B would have been necessary, but I'm glad it wasn't." As Angela and Dr. Lowell emerged from their hiding place, Thomas climbed down from the combine, legs shaky with receding adrenaline. The farm had become a hive of activity, evidence being collected, statements taken, Centaur personnel secured in transport vehicles. Sheriff Dawson approached, holstering his weapon. "Thomas, you all right? When Mercer called saying you had armed men on your property, I almost didn't believe it." "I'm still processing it myself," Thomas admitted, "but yes, we're all okay." He looked toward where Marcus Whitman was being escorted to a police vehicle, his face ashen. "AgriFuture's been poisoning my land, Ray, deliberately contaminating my water to force me to sell." "Got worse than that," the sheriff replied grimly. "According to the FBI, this Centaur outfit has been doing this across multiple states, identifying properties with valuable resources, then using corporate fronts to acquire them after forcing out the original owners." Thomas felt a wave of vindication mixed with horror at how close they'd come to losing everything. "What happens now?" "Now," Agent Carter said, joining their conversation, "we build a case. The evidence your friend Mercer collected combined with what we've gathered today should be enough to bring down both Centaur and the executives at AgriFuture, who knowingly participated in their scheme." Thomas looked across his property, now swarming with law enforcement. Just 24 hours earlier, he had been a struggling farmer facing foreclosure, unaware of the deliberate sabotage orchestrated against him. Now he stood at the center of what would clearly become a major federal case. As the immediate danger passed, a new reality began to take shape. His farm and his family's legacy had been saved not by agricultural innovation or a lucky break in the weather, but by the mysterious veteran he'd hired despite his town's warnings. And somewhere in the chaos of law enforcement activity, Thomas caught Mercer's eye across the yard. The veteran gave him a single nod, acknowledgement of what they'd accomplished together, and perhaps something more. A connection forged in crisis that neither had expected when Mercer had first walked up the dusty road to Thomas's farm, carrying nothing but a rucksack and secrets that would change everything. 3 months later, Thomas stood at the edge of his eastern field, watching the autumn sun glint off new irrigation equipment. The wheat had been replanted after extensive soil remediation, and the land was slowly healing. Environmental specialists had declared the groundwater safe again after all of Centaur's chemical dispersal units had been removed and neutralized. The farm had become something of a local landmark, following what the media dubbed the Pinecrest conspiracy. News vans had camped at his driveway for weeks as the story broke nationally. A private military contractor working with agricultural corporations to forcibly acquire valuable land through environmental sabotage. Congressional hearings were ongoing, and executives from both Centaur and AgriFuture faced federal charges. "Thinking deep thoughts?" came Angela's voice from behind him. Thomas turned to see his daughter approaching, clipboard in hand. She had taken a leave of absence from the Agricultural Extension Office to oversee the rehabilitation of their farm, applying cutting-edge remediation techniques. "Just appreciating the view," Thomas replied. "Farm's looking better than it has in years." It was true. Beyond the replanted fields, the farmhouse sported a fresh coat of paint, the barn had a new roof, and the equipment shed, rebuilt after Thomas had driven the combine harvester through it, was now a proper workshop. "The latest soil tests came back this morning," Angela said, handing him the clipboard. "Contamination levels are below detectable limits now. The myco-remediation process worked even better than expected." "And the special project?" he asked. Angela smiled. "The underground water monitoring system is fully operational. Any unusual chemical signatures in the aquifer will trigger immediate alerts. No one will be able to tamper with our water again without setting off alarms across 3 counties. The monitoring system had been Mercer's idea, a civilian adaptation of military technology used to safeguard water supplies in conflict zones. The federal government had funded its installation as part of a pilot program for protecting vulnerable agricultural resources. "Where is our resident security expert anyway?" Thomas asked, looking toward the bunkhouse where Mercer had continued to live, despite numerous offers from government agencies following his role in exposing Centaur's operations. "In town with Sheriff Dawson," Angela replied, "finalizing his testimony for next week's federal grand jury." Thomas nodded. Mercer had become an essential witness in the case against Centaur's leadership, his insider knowledge proving invaluable to prosecutors. What had surprised Thomas was Mercer's decision to remain in Pinecrest Valley after the immediate crisis had passed. "You know," Angela said carefully, "the EPA's remediation team is wrapping up next week. They've offered me a consulting position, overseeing similar cases across the region." "You thinking of taking it?" Thomas asked. "Maybe. It's important work." She paused. "But I'd need to base my operations somewhere central to the affected areas." Thomas understood what she wasn't quite saying. "The farmhouse has plenty of room. Always has." Angela's relief was visible. "I wasn't sure if you'd want me underfoot all the time. This farm was always meant to be a family operation," Thomas replied. "Your mother would be proud to see you putting your expertise to work here, even if it's not in the way we originally imagined." Inside, Thomas found several messages on his answering machine. One from Bill Hawkins about a community meeting, another from a national agricultural magazine requesting an interview, and a third from a lawyer representing farmers in a neighboring county pursuing their own case against AgriFuture. The farm that had been on the brink of financial ruin now stood at the center of a national conversation about corporate accountability, environmental protection, and the rights of family farmers. "Town's changed," he observed. Angela nodded. "Not just the town, the whole valley. People are paying attention to things they ignored before. Water quality, corporate farming practices, land use rights." She was right. Pinecrest Valley had transformed in the wake of the Centaur exposure. AgriFuture's local operations had been suspended pending investigations, and several of their corporate farms had been placed into receivership. Smaller farmers who had been forced out over the years were beginning to return, encouraged by new protections and oversight mechanisms. The sound of a vehicle approaching drew their attention. Thomas recognized Mercer's truck, a recent purchase to replace the battered Honda Civic he'd arrived with. Beside him was Sheriff Dawson. "Thomas," the sheriff called as he climbed out. "Looks like the remediation's coming along nicely." "Better than expected," Thomas confirmed. "Angela's been working miracles with those mushroom cultures of hers." "Mycoremediation," Angela corrected automatically, "and it's not miracles, just good science." Mercer joined them, carrying a folder thick with documents. He looked different than he had 3 months ago, still alert and observant, but without the constant tension that had characterized his earlier demeanor. "How'd it go?" Thomas asked. "Prosecutors are confident," Mercer replied. "Between my testimony, the physical evidence from the dispersal units, and the financial records they've uncovered, they expect indictments for at least 12 Centaur executives, and 5 from AgriFuture, including Marcus Whitman." "Any word on Reeves?" Thomas asked, referring to Centaur's head of operations, who had led the assault on the farm. "Negotiating a plea deal," Sheriff Dawson answered, "trading information on Centaur's international operations for a reduced sentence." Inside, Angela prepared coffee. The kitchen table, once just a place for solitary meals, had become a command center for the ongoing legal and environmental response. "There's something else," Mercer said once they were seated. "The FBI task force has offered me a formal position as a consultant. They're expanding their investigation into similar operations in other agricultural regions." Thomas felt a twinge of disappointment. Mercer's expertise was too valuable to remain isolated on a small farm in Pinecrest Valley. "When do you leave?" he asked. "That's the thing," Mercer replied, meeting Thomas's gaze directly. "I told them I'd consider it, but only if I could remain based here. Remote work with travel as needed." Thomas blinked in surprise. "Here? Why?" Mercer seemed almost uncomfortable with the question. "Let's just say I've come to appreciate having roots somewhere. And this place," he glanced around the farmhouse, "there's something honest about it, something worth protecting. Plus," Sheriff Dawson added with a knowing smile, "having a former ranger with counterintelligence experience settling in the county isn't something I'm going to argue against. Already appointed him as a special deputy for environmental enforcement." As evening approached, Sheriff Dawson departed, leaving Thomas, Angela, and Mercer to share a simple dinner. The domesticity of the scene would have been unimaginable 3 months earlier, when Thomas had been a solitary figure facing financial ruin, and Mercer had been a mysterious drifter carrying dangerous secrets. After dinner, Thomas stepped onto the porch, gazing out at his land in the fading light. The farm looked different now, not just because of the physical improvements, but because he saw it with new awareness. Mercer joined him, leaning against the porch railing. "Something on your mind?" "Just thinking about how things change," Thomas replied. 3 months ago I was about to lose this place. Now Now you're at the center of a national case study in environmental protection and corporate accountability. Mercer finished for him. Thomas nodded. Funny how life works sometimes. If you hadn't walked up my driveway that day, you'd have figured it out eventually, Mercer said with quiet confidence. You were already suspicious about the water, had your daughter running tests. I just accelerated the timeline. Before Centaur could finish the job, Thomas pointed out. He studied the younger man for a moment. You really planning to stay in Pinecrest Valley? Man with your skills could write his own ticket anywhere. Mercer was silent for a moment, his gaze tracking across the darkening fields. When I left Centaur, I was running from something, from what they wanted me to become, from what I'd seen them do. Felt like I'd lost my bearings, my sense of purpose. He turned to face Thomas directly. What I found here was something worth running toward instead. Not just exposing Centaur, but being part of something constructive rather than destructive. Building something instead of tearing it down. Fixing irrigation systems instead of sabotaging them, Thomas suggested with a wry smile. Something like that, Mercer agreed. Plus, I made a promise to see this through. The case against Centaur is just the beginning. There are other corporations, other communities facing similar threats. Having a base of operations, people I can trust, that matters. The sound of vehicles approaching interrupted their conversation. Thomas recognized Bill Hawkins' truck leading a small procession of cars up the driveway. Members of the community arriving for the impromptu gathering that had become a regular occurrence in recent weeks. As people began to gather in the yard, Thomas saw faces that had once regarded Mercer with suspicion, now greeting him with respect and acceptance. The mysterious veteran, who had been viewed as a potential threat, was now recognized as the catalyst who had exposed a danger that had been lurking undetected in their community for years. Even Ellie Dawson, who had been among the most skeptical about Mercer, arrived with homemade pies and a warm greeting for the former soldier. Never thought I'd say this, she told Thomas quietly, but that man might be the best thing that's happened to this valley in decades. As the gathering dispersed, later that evening, Thomas found himself reflecting on the strange, winding path that had brought them all to this moment. A struggling farmer, a whistleblower on the run, a threatened community, all connected by choices that seemed small when made, but powerful in their consequences. You know, Thomas said as they walked back to the porch, my father used to say, that character gets tested most, not in moments of crisis, but in the small everyday decisions that don't seem important at the time. Like hiring a mysterious veteran despite everyone's warnings? Angela asked with a smile. Sometimes the most important choice is the simplest one, Thomas replied. To trust your own judgment when others counsel fear, to give someone a chance when it would be easier to turn them away. As the sun set over Pinecrest Valley, casting the renewed farm in golden light, Thomas took in the scene before him. His daughter engaged in work that mattered deeply to her. A former soldier who had found purpose beyond combat. A community, united rather than divided, all stemming from one simple decision to trust his instincts rather than succumb to fear of the unknown. The farm that had nearly been lost now stood as a symbol of resilience and renewal, and Thomas himself, once a solitary figure facing defeat, now found himself surrounded by allies in a fight bigger than his own survival, all because, when a scarred veteran with a mysterious past had walked up his driveway looking for work, Thomas Reeves had chosen to say yes when everyone else had counseled no. Some choices, it seemed, carried the power to change everything that followed. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.